questions that students have is, okay, I've made the initial connection. We got the coffee chat. How do you suggest kind of cultivating and developing that relationship? Because I think that's really what it is about, right? It's not, you don't want to have to say, hey, Ashley, great chat today. And then can I have a job? So
Yeah,
and it's really more that you'd want them to organically be reaching out to you. So
sure.
again, how do you kind of develop that space and that connection with someone over time when you're, again, a lot of times I think people feel like an imposter of, I don't really have that much to give, or I'm not that interesting over long periods of time.
The way that I've approached sort of like mentorship and asking for feedback is always asking for it. So if you have the opportunity to connect with someone you really admire or that you aspire to be like or whatnot, at the end of that first coffee chat or call or whatever it is, it's, hey, like I really appreciated your perspective and time spent. Is it okay if I check in with you every quarter? Is it okay if I send you a few questions via email, every few weeks as I figure out my next career move? It's keeping the other person accountable a bit. And if it's very likely that if they volunteered their time to spend with you for that initial coffee chat, they're interested in who you are, your career trajectory. And I think like more and more, the world's very, very small, right? The person that you're mentoring and helping could very well be eventually your boss, right? And so that network is so important, and that pay it forward mentality is so important because everything truly, and I'm a true believer in this, everything truly becomes, comes full circle. And so, again, ask for the time, ask the questions. And I always tell folks at the end of any interesting call that you have, ask the question of, is there anyone else that you really like or that you really respect that I should be introduced to or that I could reach out to? And then there's almost a nice path there to continue on the relationship.
I guess I know the answer to this one. Did mentorship help you in your career? Was it a key part? But then I think part B, which no one really talks about, maybe that student that you mentioned before did a good job of it, is how do you be a good mentee?
Absolutely. Mentorship is where I relate everything to where I am today to mentorship. And that's because having champions and people behind the scenes, saying Ashley's really good at this, or, Ashley, you need to get better at that. And let's be constructive and let's improve, certain parts of how you work, and just being, cheering me on and being in my corner and making sure I'm successful, is huge. And so you want 4 to 5 people. It doesn't have to be at your current job, right? Or at school, or have a diversity of folks around the table that could give you different perspectives, but are true supporters in your journey, that could offer these different perspectives. On the mentorship side, what I find successful is for mentors to come with understanding and to come with the idea that you have to appreciate the ride, and that you can offer again a really interesting and different perspective to this person, whether it's getting into business school, or how to navigate your first job out of college, or how to even get a job during college. On the mentee side, I think it's coming with very specific asks, and again trying to be vulnerable, or being vulnerable in your conversations. I think that's when you'll get a lot out of the mentor. Having specific asks and sort of a roadmap as to where you want this mentoring relationship to go, as well as a cadence, as we discussed, also provides a really great framework. It keeps the mentor accountable, keeps you accountable, in the asks and the deliverables.
I think there's a lot of students a lot of times who say, I want to be an entrepreneur. And then they end up, 20 years down the line and they never made the jump.
Yeah.
And then I think the second piece that's really interesting is your own personal story and background. Like you said, there was probably a lot of pressure from your parents or your family being like, hey, you got to Ivy Leagues, you made it at a big bank. Why are you going to go to, I mean, I'm guessing you took a pay cut along the
A
way.
big pay cut.
Yeah. And so again, they're sitting there like, why would you do that to yourself? It's almost like masochism. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk through that and like how, again, you were able to keep your North Star.
My father still bugs me today as to why I'm not at Morgan Stanley. So it doesn't stop. But I think what was really it for me was, I was sitting at sort of the desk, and I was like, what if, like, what if I don't jump to this startup? What if I don't make this leap? I have like a really great safety net of a really great network from Morgan Stanley, like 2 years of work experience on this desk, the name on my resume. What's the worst that could happen? I was always so curious, again, going back to Brown University, just being involved in the venture and startup ecosystems there. I saw a lot of success stories coming out of Brown at that time. And, Brown's still a very entrepreneurial school. And so that's really what made me take the leap. It was more of this like, what if I never do this? And I always tell people jumping from Morgan Stanley to the startup was the best career decision I ever made, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't know the ins and outs of early stage company building, and that it's not all glamorous as it seems. You often see the Mark Zuckerbergs, right? The Evan Spiegels on all these shows and the success stories. But there's a lot of work, there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of burnout at early stage companies. And so I was so appreciative that I made that switch, and that I was literally on the phone selling this product to people who would hang up on me. I was thinking about strategy. I was thinking about, how does e-com and marketplaces work, how to engage the consumer. And if I hadn't made that jump, I wouldn't have that perspective.
How do you, and I know you talked a bit about this too, about, especially kind of focusing on VC now, of, when you break in, it actually takes a lot of reps. It does take that persistence, because again, it's a fairly still, I would call it opaque, and almost, it's there, like you said before in our talk, there's not really like connections to campus. It's not like there's a recruiter that comes through in the fall and says, here's all the openings, right? It's kind of a very much like people kind of wander into it. And so I guess for those students that are interested in that, do you think, like, would you go back to a startup job to start out school now? Would you go to the, still go to finance, or do you think it's necessary to have all those things before going to VC, or how would you kind of plot that out now?
Yeah, I often get the question like, what's sort of the ideal trajectory to VC, and there's none. I often use this word zigzag, or the phrase zigzag in my career, and I think the most interesting people in the venture community are folks that have a lot of zigzags and have spent a lot of time at different companies. I do think the more comprehensive experience that you have, so let's say you start in finance or consulting, or you start out at a startup, or you start out as a founder, and then jump around to just get different perspectives. How are things done at a small company, a medium-sized company, a big company? How are things done on like the marketing side versus the sales side, versus as much, of that diversity that you could get in your different experiences and functional experiences, I think is really, really valuable. Because as an investor, you're of course building theses, you're coming up with, where you think the world's going, you're networking constantly with founders, but it's also what's the most, I think, important is the relationship side of things, and being a value add to the founders, and saying that, oh wait, I did this at this company, I created a marketing plan, I can model for you an early stage, pro forma or whatever. I can introduce you to really great technical and non-technical talent, just given that I've spent time in this space. So I think that's just to get folks thinking about how to sort of build out their careers and how to think about things. There's not one set path to this world. And in fact, I actually think that being on the operating side for a significant amount of time is better than doing the banking or consulting stuff. Because again, you're actually in the weeds, and you get a true story as to what this early stage company building is all about.